Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you all to this Flexo Global webinar. Today our featured presenter is Calvin Curtice, the Director of the Proofing Technical Applications Group for the Eastman Kodak Company, where he is responsible for delivering and supporting proofing and technology products. Calvin joined Kodak in 2001 after 9 years of production experience and has been integral in the development roadmap for Kodak color and proofing products. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Calvin.
Well, thank you very much, Laura and Dave, and thanks to everyone that's attending this. I appreciate taking the time to listen to me talk about proofing for packaging. As Laura described, I am the manager of the Technical Applications Group for proofing, and at a high level, my responsibility is to handle difficult customer escalations, take the information we learn from those, and bring them back to development to make new products that kind of address those things. So that's the perspective I'm bringing into this presentation. And one of the lucky things I have is a very broad perspective. So I get to talk to a lot of customers in a lot of different regions. And so I do have bringing that kind of broad perspective. So if anyone has any questions, as already mentioned, you can send them to us online here, or you can even follow up with me afterwards. I love to talk to people. You guys definitely have more depth. You use this stuff every day, so it's a collaborative process for sure. One of the things that has been apparent to me, I have a chance to go to industry events and customer summits, is really a general dissatisfaction with how proofing works for packaging. And so one of the things I want to talk about today is, what are those specific things that go wrong that causes dissatisfaction? And some of that is a result of the uniqueness of Flexo and package production. So really the presentation does focus a lot on flexography and answer questions. A lot of it is applied to any package production type, but a lot of the stuff is unique to Flexo. I'll also do a technology comparison in different types of proofing technologies you can use to try and meet the needs of these unique Flexo situations. I'm going to do a quick summary of the Kodak solution and how we're trying to meet the needs here. And then we'll have time for some questions and answers. So one of the first things I'd like to do is, it's easy to forget the purpose of a color proof. And that's one thing that I've noticed talking to people, and I've even done it before, but really what a color proof should do in any segment, including packaging, is to give you the answer before you get started. I mean, that's kind of what we want. And when you do that, it ultimately removes costs from the production process. So if you know the things that will go wrong before you go through the expense of doing the production process, and you can fix them, you're going to save money, and it's going to happen faster, so you'll save time. And the way generally this is done is by characterizing a press in a known good condition that you know you can get back to, and creating characterization data from that condition, and then using that as a target to match the proof to. That setup, or that characterization, then becomes the setup for all future press runs with that same print condition. I know this is elementary stuff, but it is something I've actually had a lot of discussions with people about as far as the purpose of all of that. So, the reason for that is because the proofing system is easier to control and stabilize than a press, in particular a Flexo press, which is a very complicated mechanical device, and it's hard to control. So the proofing solution is easier to control and less expensive to use. Also, that the proof must be able to represent different targets across print conditions, and they should be achievable. And one of the major issues that we've seen definitely in troubleshooting customer problems is inconsistency on the print side. And I'm going to talk about, in a few slides here, really the two primary buckets I put problems into, and this is one of them for sure. So flexographic printing does present a lot of unique challenges to proofing, and it's certainly getting more complex. This is something I think everyone on the call is familiar with, the different number of print conditions that are now being used in flexographic printing. And the more time-consuming and difficult it is to set up a proof to this print condition, the less likely it will be done correctly. So I think this is something that will be kind of a reoccurring theme throughout the presentation is if you have to have the answer before you get started, oftentimes the right thing doesn't get done. The proofing system has to be consistent over time, and I think this is actually something that pretty much all proofing solutions do. It's not perfect, but in general, I think most of the proofing systems that I'm familiar with have done a very good job of being consistent. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of times this just doesn't work. So the two major areas that I have for why the proof doesn't reliably predict the press, the first is that the original target that you're using isn't a good representation of future press conditions. So, as a simple example, you characterize some print condition on a press run, and you think you have characterized what you're going to do in another month from then, but at that time something else changes. You have a different spot color or a slightly different substrate, and without really consciously knowing it, something actually changed, and the original target isn't what you're shooting at anymore. The second reason is inconsistency. So if something is moving, either the press or the proof, being able to predict it becomes really impossible. And trying to troubleshoot where things went wrong is very challenging. So I think a lot of times, from what I've seen, customers will say, this just doesn't work. I don't know why it's not working, but I made a proof and it didn't predict what's going to happen on press. So kind of breaking down proof conditions or print conditions that are required to meet for flexographic printing. They are the wide range of substrates. So I think everyone's familiar with the range of substrates from foil, shrinks, folding carton, all the things that are used in package printing. There's an extensive use of spot color reproduction. We have solid spots, overprinting solids, tints. There's wide gamut printing, which we see a lot more of, different specialty inks. Basically not a lot of standardization. There's the impact of screening. So in flexography, handling the highlight, tone reproduction, and generally the coarser screen sets, the screening can have a large impact on the final reproduction. The highlight tone reproduction is a very important area, obviously, in flexography. So being able to visualize what will happen in that extreme highlight is an important aspect of proofing. And also, the three-dimensional nature of the final piece is important, and something that we've seen our customers do much more is actually make comps of a proof comp. So some more detail on each of these, and in the following slides I have some images to kind of demonstrate some of the more critical aspects of this. So the wide range of substrate I talked about, we see a lot of different substrates being used, and they have influence in all areas of color reproduction. I can influence things like your highlight tone reproduction, your dot gain, the impact on spot colors, those types of things. So when you're making a proof across these different substrates, you have a range of options going from proofing on the actual substrate, which gives you a lot of flexibility in inheriting some of the things the substrate does, all the way to the other end of just doing a simulation of the substrate. In the case of screening, you have a variety of different types of screening techniques to get used, from FM to AM screening, hybrid screening to deal with the highlight dot. You have highlight cut often. There's risk of moire. There's some grain that can be introduced by some of these screening techniques. And so again, on the proof side, you have an option from doing a proof that's very halftone accurate, all the way to one that is primarily focused on color and can do things like simulation of grain. Tone reproduction, again, in the highlight, this is an area that is a specific area of concern. And I'll talk a bit more about that, as well as in the shadow. We tend to have quite a bit of dot gain. And there's also tone reproduction when you're screening spot colors. So on the proofing side, there are workflow controls. I'll talk about some of the ones we have at Kodak. You have ICC profiles that you can create, and you can also use curves in some cases. So there's a variety of tools we have to try and predict that tone reproduction. There's the use of specialty colors, including white, metallic. Laydown order can be very important in color reproduction. You have overprints of transparent and opaque colors, and multiple passes of some of these colors. And on the proofing side, with some proofing systems, you have control over laydown order and controlling the overprints and simulating multiple passes. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Spot color reproduction, obviously very important in packaging. As I mentioned before, there's a interplay between spot color accuracy and the substrate you're using. The screen tint is something that highly influences spot color tint. The screening does, so I'll talk a bit more about that in Flexo. And then the overprinting of spot colors. And on the proof options you have to kind of control these things is the substrate simulation, screen tint control. Some of the workflow software have the ability to control the screen tint to color, and overprint controls. And then finally, one of the things that I've mentioned already with Flexo is the range of print conditions. There's so many things that can change. You really want a proofing solution, if possible, to behave like a press, to limit the number of fingerprints you have to do. And so some of the things you can do on the proofing software is to edit profiles. You can kind of group together common characterizations so that you're within range of a particular print condition. And of course, standards give us kind of a common target to aim to. And so these are the, I think, the critical packaging proof needs, and some specifics on the features, and then the options on the proofing side. And so some of the visual demonstrations of these things and how they can influence how well a proof can predict the press. The first one is in the highlight tone reproduction. So being able to have a very consistent highlight dot in flexography is difficult. And there's some tricks that are used to obtain that consistency. And this demonstrates on the bottom eliminating one of the gray levels available in the printing process. So generally you have 256 gray levels. That first gray level, this would be a cut. This would be something where you're just eliminating that first printable gray level. And obviously, not having that there has a big influence on print reproduction. So if you have a vignette or some area that has a 0.4 that you expect to print and it doesn't, you want to see that in the proof before you go to press. The top scale shows that a situation where you are going to hold all 256 gray levels, and in that case, oftentimes that first printable dot is quite large. And so you could have, in this case, this demonstrates roughly a 12% minimum printed dot. And having that very dense area as your first printable dot obviously has influence in saturated colors. If you happen to have a 0.8 area of cyan, for example, on a red, that's going to have much more influence than you want and can result in a lot of retouching and removing of that. Those are the types of things you want to see. And one of the challenges here is those types of nuances are often missed in an ICC profile. So this really is a discontinuity issue in the data set that you read in. So oftentimes on the proofing solution, this is a real challenge to reproduce. And we've put great effort in trying to give tools to show this in a proof. The next kind of approach you can take to getting consistency when you're printing highlight dots is to use hybrid screening. And really this is using fewer but larger dots in an FM pattern in some area of the highlight. And by doing that, you get more latitude in print. However, the transition point between the AM and FM screening can cause quite a visual artifact. And in fact, the area where there is an FM screen, you can get a lot more grain. So we've had, I've seen customers that have printed, for example, a package, a flexible package that has a sky in the background, and you can see where a cloud transitions from a light area to a dark area. It looks really strange, and you really want to be able to see that before you go to press. So a proofing system that would allow you to see this transition point and see the impact of that would be greatly beneficial. So those are two areas of highlight reproduction and impact of screening. The other one is spot colors. So the substrate influence on spot colors, I have two cases here. The first is where you have a particular spot color target, and you're going to be printing it across a variety of substrates. Well, obviously that substrate is going to influence the output color. And so a darker substrate will muddy up that color, and a substrate that has a kind of a blue bias will make it bluer. So sometimes this will actually happen on press. So if you're not changing inks, you're using one spot ink and you're printing across substrates, that substrate is going to influence it in this way. So obviously in the case of a proofing solution, you can transfer directly to the substrate. You kind of inherit that change just by transferring it to different substrates. Otherwise, if you're not going on the actual substrate, you have to maintain multiple spot color lists to achieve the target based on the influence of the substrate, and there are tools that help you do that. The other case is probably the more common case, which is you have some very important spot color that needs to be reproduced, a brand color, for example, and you want that to match as well as possible across these different substrates. And sometimes that's not possible because the substrate is causing too much of a disruption, and sometimes it is. And so the proofing solution should be able to show you a print condition where all colors match across the different substrates. And so again, in the case where you're actually transferring to the substrate, you can adjust the spot color so that it looks the same across at least common substrate types. And one of the benefits of that is you can kind of use the proofing solution to combine different substrates that can match together. So the proofing solution can actually act as kind of a color setup procedure for press as well. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the tools that we have when we talk about making sure spot colors match across substrates. Moire, this is an area, we see a lot more customers converting spot colors to process builds because it saves a lot of money on press. And something I think is a general trend that we'll see more of. Mathematically, you cannot use more than 3 angles at the same time without getting some kind of interference pattern. So this really is demonstrating 2 different screen sets that are interfering with each other and causing moire. There's also a subject moire, where you have a screen set that's interfering with some subject. I guess the classic one would be a striped shirt, some screen angle interfering with each other. And again, these are things that, particularly if you're doing a lot of process builds of spot colors, you really want to see a halftone accurate proof to see this moire. And there are many options for halftone accuracy, but you want to make sure to be able to catch these moire instances. Spot color overprints. This is an area that is particularly challenging. In this visual example, on the right side is a press target, and on the left side is a inkjet proof reproduction of that. And the challenge comes in various overprints of spot colors. So if you have a look at the solid spot color, in this case it's a cyan, magenta, and yellow block, and 2 Pantone colors, Pantone 333, excuse me, and warm red. And in isolation, you do a pretty good job. And the reason for that is you have a defined target you're aiming at. So you have an LAB for those solid areas that the inkjet system does a good job of hitting. The problem comes in when they overprint. So on the press side, the overprint is a physical overlaying additive behavior of ink on ink. And you have things like wet trap. You have how the different dyes interact with each other. And so that overprint is a physical operation. On the proofing side, where those 2 objects overprint, it splits it out into another object. And if you don't have characterization data telling you what that should be, it has to use some kind of model to predict it. And so oftentimes, in this example, and this is an actual example where you had a delta of less than 2 for the solid spot colors, but where they overprint, we've seen upward of 17 to 20, so some very outrageous differences. It's somewhat unpredictable where you have these differences. Another area that you have problems with is ink limit. So if you have more than 2 overprints, there's an example there where you have a 3-color overprint lighter than a 2-color overprint, and essentially just ran out of ink for that particular object. And so this has I've seen this kind of show itself as a mystery. You know, one time the proof predicted what was going to happen on the press, the next time it doesn't. And we've done a lot of tests where we've done a whole bunch of spot overprints on press, on approval, and on inkjet. And you'll see some, like I said, relatively unpredictable behavior where some colors look very close and others don't. And so there are tools, and we have tools that allow you to put in information about overprinting spot colors, but it's an awful lot of information to manage, and it requires you to have the answer first. So the other aspect of packaging, of course, is the three-dimensional nature of the final piece. So unlike other segments like commercial and publication, the printing step in packaging really is just a decoration step in a larger manufacturing process, is one way to look at it. And ultimately what you want to see is the package. It's not just the printing. And so, you know, I think for at least a few years, customers really would like to use three-dimensional proof to see some of the complex interactions that take place. And this can be used oftentimes upstream, so that early in the design cycle you can visualize what the actual printed piece will look like on the shelf. And you know, this goes back to, I mentioned before, the purpose of a proof is to get the answer before you start. And that's true not only of the printing process, but the overall design process. You know, people would really like to know what is this product going to look like, how will people respond to the design as early as possible. So having a proof that can give you that power reduces costs and should increase the time to market, or increase the speed to market, I should say. A lot of people are using this actually proofs for product testing. So they'll actually create a variety of samples and then use them as finished pieces to find out how customers react to it. And so this is something I think that on the proofing side caught us a bit off guard, is the number of people using proofs as the final printed piece. You know, obviously the move to more of a local or hyper-local product design, there's a lot of people that would use 300 or 500 pieces of something. And even global brands that are customizing kind of a standard design to local conditions often use proofing as the final printed piece. So in the end, having a three-dimensional proof allows you to see how closures interact with the overall product design, how different substrate types interface with each other. And so three-dimensional proofs are kind of the next step in package proofing. And of course, what drives all of these, I guess, requirements for proofing are the market trends. And you know, these are probably familiar market trends to everyone, but global brands want brand equity, so they want you to be able to, a purchaser to recognize a brand very quickly. And that gives them shelf differentiation. And every study shows that people have very short attention spans when they print out or pick out a product off a shelf. So product needs to jump out. And in order to make a product jump out, generally it's increasing the complexity of that product design. So you're using things like foils and things that will catch someone's attention. Color matching across substrate, obviously that helps to build brand identity. So when you see Kodak yellow, you know it's Kodak yellow no matter what substrate it's on, and it catches your attention and gives you the memory of a trusted brand. Accelerating time to market, you know, how long it takes you to get to market has a direct impact on how much money you make. So any technology that helps you get a product to market quicker is going to be beneficial to your business. And of course, always reducing costs and increasing profitability. So these market trends, you know, are driving complication or complexity into design. And it's also forcing, I think, proofing products to be more efficient and to really show you ahead of time what's going to happen to eliminate error. So when that's kind of an overview of the proof side and the things that need to be right on the proof side. Is just quickly looking at the printing conditions and some of the common variables in printing. We mentioned the ability to hold a highlight dot. If the highlight isn't robust enough, you can have things like the extreme highlights folding over and giving you that terrible flexo edge look. You know, a lot of times to change the impression as you go through a press run because the plate's wearing down, or you're trying to hold higher densities, those types of things. And those kinds of inconsistencies create changes in dot gain and ultimately color reproduction throughout the tonal range. Having the ability to maintain a solid ink density throughout a press run, something that is a struggle. And then not really within a press run necessarily, but just changing print conditions. So you know, substrates changing, I guess, even throughout a run. Spot color conditions, one case they overprint, the next case they don't, those types of things. And you know, it's very, I would say it's common. I've seen, you know, press conditions vary to delta E of 10 pretty easily. So those types of things become very challenging to predict if they're moving around that much. And so I believe in proofing for packaging, the variability in the printing process is really one of the key drivers of the problem. And you know, just being aware of that actually hopefully would be beneficial. And I think proofing software, a lot of people have made proofing software that allow you to track a proof, proof to proof, and show that you're making a consistent proof. As I mentioned before, the trick is to make sure that the proof you're repeatedly producing actually is aimed at the target you're aiming at. So what are the costs? You know, I talk about driving costs out of the production process. These numbers are really from our Kodak marketing team as kind of industry averages. So if you can have a proofing system that limits the number of press fingerprints, you can save a significant amount of money. Anytime you have to stop the press, you know, if there's something that's gone wrong and you have to shut things down, you're looking at $600 an hour. If you have to stop the press and remake the plate, obviously the speed to market reduces the cost of making the plate and the time the press isn't running. So having a proof that doesn't really have any surprises, that will tell you the major things that will go wrong, will show you things like screening and make sure the content is accurate, will limit the amount of remakes you have to do. On-press approvals. So if you have, if you build confidence with your customer that the proof is actually going to show you what you're going to get on the print run, then you don't have to have as many on-press approvals. And then just the risk of having a catastrophic print event. You know, having a proofing solution you know is set up, you know it's going to be an achievable target, is really an insurance policy against those types of events. So in summary, we have to have a proof that can hit all of these variables, or at least if they can't, understand which ones they're not able to hit and recognize it, and a printing system that's consistent and repeatable. So when we talk about the two big buckets of technology, I kind of lump them between inkjet and halftone proofing. And conveniently, those are the solutions we have at Kodak. You know, inkjet does an excellent job of color matching characterized print conditions. And you know, kind of as a general theme here, if you have the answer before you get started and you can feed that answer to an inkjet system, it does a really good job of hitting it. Likewise with spot color reproduction, if you have spot colors in isolation and they're not overprinting each other, and they're not tints or tints overprinting each other, inkjet does an excellent job of hitting those spot color targets. Proof-to-proof consistency, particularly because of if you have a high-quality inkjet media, it has very excellent proof-to-proof consistency. There's always constantly improving technology on the inkjet proofing side. And one of the things that inkjet technology can do is leverage the large consumer use of inkjet. And so they can take technology that is used in that much larger profitable market and come up with proofing solutions for it. So, you know, examples are the Epson WT7900, which allows proofing with white, UV, and solvent printers. There's a lot of workflow solutions out there, proofing software solutions that have been around a while and do some pretty advanced things. So I think on the inkjet side, software is a strength. And it's definitely a cost savings when you compare it to halftone proofing. You know, each proof is less expensive. And if it's used and applied correctly for things like early color or content check, or for a contract proof in the right context, it's a relatively inexpensive check to ensure your printing is right. The one area that is a concern is the fact that you need the answer before you get started. So as I mentioned before now, inkjet does a very good job of hitting a known target. But if there is a change in the print condition, it's not going to know about it. And it doesn't behave fundamentally like a flexo press. So it's worth being cognizant of that and understanding that if there's any differences, you're probably not going to predict what happened on press. On the halftone side, generally a halftone proofer behaves a lot like a press. And in general, it produces a proof that's achievable across target print conditions. Now, so for example, we'll talk about changing substrates, being able to image on the actual substrate. You don't actually need a different characterization data set for that in many cases. In many cases, you can just put the proof on the other substrate and you get the influence of that. The halftone accuracy, halftone systems are at the same resolution as the plate device, and they do a really good job of showing those things that we talked about with Moire, for example, the impact of hybrid screening, those types of things. They can show you the related artifacts. Now, inkjet does have the capability of creating a halftone proof, and it works sometimes. And I think that's the problem, is that in my experience, you can oftentimes get false Moire, and it's hard to use something that works sometimes, I guess. It has excellent spot color accuracy, particularly in overprint areas. So by comparison, the halftone proof also layers spot colors on top of each other, and you get a target that's achievable. So it behaves, generally speaking, like a press with spot colors overprinting each other. You can do three-dimensional proofs because of the ability to go on the actual substrate. There are examples of inkjet technology, certainly, where you can go on the actual substrate and do three-dimensional design. But being able to combine the accuracy of spot colors and the halftone accuracy also into the three-dimensional proof means that your three-dimensional proof looks an awful lot like the printed piece. And ultimately, because you can see all of those major items with a halftone proof, it reduces costs at the more expensive print production stage. It is an increased cost per proof. And so, I'll go into it a bit more in our positioning of these products, but looking at what both of these technologies are good at, it's not really an either or. It's when do you use one and when do you use the other? Because both of them can take costs out of the production process as long as they're matched up well with what you're trying to do. So what is the Kodak strategy? Our strategy, really with all our products, is to increase the production efficiency and reduce costs for our customers. And we have a full range of solutions that are aimed at doing that. On the plate side, the Kodak Flexcel NX system, everyone is aware of, I think, the high quality of that plate. But really, the important value of it is that it removes costs from the production process. And it creates a lot of stability, so it's a great target for our proofing system to match. Our other products on the proofing side is Kodak Approval. That's our halftone offering. Matchprint Inkjet is our inkjet offering. And Kodak Proofing Software is the software solution that drives our proofing products. So just a quick comment about the Flexcel NX system. And I would encourage those of you who haven't seen it on the Flexo Global website. There's a presentation from my colleague, Dr. John Anderson. He goes into much more depth on this system. But as it applies to proofing, the key thing for us is that it produces a very stable printing process. So it has a unique imaging process for the plate that produces a very consistent, stable, flat top dot, particularly in the highlight and shadow areas, and across a variety of print conditions. The plates last a long time on press, so you don't have as much plate wear, which would cause a lot of variability on the print side. As far as cost reduction, you're able to combine solid and tints on a single plate frequently, so you reduce the number of plates you're using. And then DigiCap NX screening allows you to print much higher ink densities. It ultimately results in a smoother ink coverage, which gives you a larger gamut. And so with that solution and some of the software tools we have, you can actually replace spot colors with process builds of those. Our Kodak proofing software solution is a single piece of software that can drive both our halftone and inkjet solutions. It's from a single client. We built in some tools that allow you to customize the highlight cut and gain for our common inkjet devices, for example, Epson. So I talked about how a profile wasn't able to capture this continuity and that extreme highlight. In our software, you can go in and essentially edit that profile to reflect that discontinuity, so you can get those highlight cuts and extreme highlight. We can customize spot and process tint colors. So if you look at how a spot color, for example, screens down in Flexo, it tends to gray a lot. And that's a result of the typical donut dot. It's not a very uniform smoothing coverage, so you get a graying. You compare that, for example, to gravure. Gravure results in a much cleaner tint color. So having the ability to adjust for those different types of print conditions is something that is very useful, particularly in inkjet proofing. The software gives us, as I said, a common solution for both of these technologies, our halftone and inkjet, and so it allows you to easily align those two products. In fact, because the approval behaves a lot like a press, oftentimes we can use the approval as a target for the inkjet. And ultimately, again, we want to reduce the cost of producing packaging for our customers. And the last point here is to deliver proofs throughout the production process. I mentioned already that a proof is one of the few things in the packaging production process that starts at the very beginning and is used at the very end. It is the thing that shows you what the color and the content and the structure will look like throughout the process. And if used correctly, it does reduce the cost and increase the speed. So one of the things that we've worked quite hard on is making sure that our Flexcel NX system works very well with our proofing solutions. And the way we've combined, in particular, Flexcel NX with the approval was to create a standard, easily determined print condition with the Flexcel NX system, and then build companion setups on the approval system. And what that allows us to do is get out-of-the-box color very close between these two, and it requires very few edits. And we've had a variety of examples of this. It works very well. And so in this proofing setup, we have predetermined highlight tone reproduction and cut information, so that we have these common setups that will give you out-of-the-box color between these. And I talked about the two major areas. One is that the proofing system needs to be able to do the things that happen on a flexographic press, and the Kodak proofing solution is very unique to be able to do that. So in the Flexcel NX system, because it's very easy to set up and it's very consistent, very stable, it's a great target for proofing. And so by combining a powerful proofing solution that can show all of those requirements for package proofing, and a printing system that's very repeatable and isn't going to move around, it allows you to do things very quickly and inexpensively. And here's the result. On the left is the printed piece, printed with Flexcel NX. In the middle, you have Kodak approval proof on the exact substrate set up for that same print condition. And on the right, we have our inkjet solution set up to the approval. So you have a good demonstration of the three things matching each other.